Our project looks at China going global through the lens of hydropower, and the project is the first comparative study on the impacts of Chinese dams in low and middle income countries. So we're looking at the environmental and the social implications, but also some of the political and economic aspects. I find this particularly interesting because China is the world leader in dams. They have about 40,000 dams within China itself, but then also 300 dams overseas, the majority of them actually being in Asia and in Africa. And because China is such a big player in the global dams arena, it is really interesting to look at what some of the impacts are. So China is turning towards low and middle income countries for access to natural resources and also for creating profits and employment for its firms. And it's also very interesting to look at dams these days because there is a revival of hydropower in the light of climate change and the search for low carbon energy. For the UK, there's two implications. So one implication is the business perspective, because the role of China in hydropower also opens up discussions about opportunity and threats for UK businesses. For example, there are opportunities along the value chain, such as for consultancies that are doing environmental impact assessments, or for suppliers of components in the turbine sector that might work with Chinese firms. But then there might also be threats, particularly with regards to competition, where UK firms or OECD firms might not be the ones that are leading the business anymore because the Chinese have overtaken them. And at the same time, there's also the donor perspective. So for example, when we think about how China is challenging Western norms in terms of big energy infrastructure development, we also have to think about how this influences UK policy, for example, UK international relations and UK aid policy. Yeah, there are two very interesting findings that we had, and one of them is actually related to the environmental impacts of dams. So what we found is that some of the dams that we're looking at, like in Ghana and in Cambodia, they're actually located in national parks, which is opening up a whole debate about conservation and the benefit of dams in national parks, which are very limited. So what we found is that what we need to do is really to mitigate the negative environmental consequences of dams, and that we need to be more careful with our sightings and the environmental impact assessment of dams, so to mitigate the environmental impacts such as threats to endangered species. And the other finding was really in the social area. So what we found was that some of the people who were living close to the Kamche Dam in Cambodia have actually not had access to power. So even though there is a hydroelectric dam that's exporting lots of the electricity to Phnom Penh, there are some local villages that still don't have any access to electricity. And they're very upset about it, understandably. Yeah, okay. And our conclusions from this is that we need to think more carefully about what the social implications of large dams are, and that in general, Chinese firms such as Sino-Hydro need to look into reducing the adverse social and environmental implications and increase the sustainability of the hydro dams.